everyone again. Welcome to ADD. So today is our first workshop, first one in the year. So we're going to be starting with Introduction to Rhino. I'm part of ADD team. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay on the far back of the room. Say yes if you do, or hands up. Okay, so Introduction to Rhino. Do you guys have anyone here who used Rhino before? Hands up. Okay, quite a few. Okay, so again, today is introduction. So we're gonna start from 0 and we're gonna build it up. If you feel like it's a little bit more basic, or maybe you're getting bored, sorry about that. We're gonna have more advanced sessions later on. But again, today we started from a ground zero and we're gonna be building you up. Okay, so hopefully everyone now familiar with our ADD model page. Do you have anyone who hasn't seen our beautiful ADD model page yet? So everyone should have been enrolled by now. We have our weekly workshops. If you scroll down, you can see that we have timetable for the whole year for both semesters. For every single Wednesday, you're going to have one and sometimes even double bill of workshops. So different members of staff, different members of ADD and CPU Atelier is going to be delivering those sessions. So please join us. You can see straight away what is going to be run. And also, if you scroll down, you're going to be able to see that on a weekly basis, you're going to have a new poster appearing with all the key information that you need to know prior to the session. Where is it going to be? Who is going to be running it, and so on and so on. Okay, Rhino. Can everyone please open Rhino either on your laptops or on PCs in front of you? It's good to mention that Rhino is an industry standard software. It's an amazing 3D modeling package. It can pretty much model anything you want. So from massive terrain for landscape design, or you can model up to a small pieces of jewelry. So it's completely up to you what you want to do with it. It can do pretty much anything. It's also available for both for Mac and Windows. So just in case any of you use an Apple devices at home and would like to install it, you're more than welcome to do so. Every student has an access for 3 months or 90 days trial. So you can use it completely for free. After that, you will need to buy it, or you can use PCs at university. So just quickly, there is rhino3d.com website where you can find how to download free trial, or if you want to purchase a student license. You can go just to the download section just here and just choose, do you want it for Windows or for Mac? So we just will need Rhino 7 for Windows or Rhino 7 for Mac. So Rhino 7 is what we're going to be using today. So it's the newest or latest, let's call it like that, Rhino. And it's available again for both Windows and Mac. It can look slightly different on Mac, but all commands are the same. It could be a little bit more limited in some cases, but not as much. You're going to notice a difference straight away on your basic level of Rhino while you only start using it. Okay, everyone has Rhino open. I'm going to count it as yes. When you first time open Rhino, it's going to pop up with a window asking which template would you like to open. If your laptop or your PC in front of you is really fast and you've missed that window, you don't know what template you have open. They all look pretty much identical. Because we are all on architecture courses or similar disciplines, we usually try to work in millimeters. So we need to make sure that the template that you're working is also set up to be in millimeters. So make sure that you can go to File, New, and it's going to straight away open you a folder where all the templates are existing. Everything, where are they all saved? The template that we need will be large object millimeters. If you double click or click open, you'll see that interface pretty much hasn't changed.
Sorry, are you recording on OBS?
I do. So large object millimeters. Again, if you're working with something on a much larger scale, if you're working with a landscape, for example, you might want to change to meters, for example, because you probably don't want to be constantly typing 10,000 millimeters distance and so on. So it's completely up to you, but usually we work in large object millimeters template. This is just to make sure that when you bring stuff, for example, from AutoCAD or from any other packages, you're always in the same units. So you're not bringing meters into millimeters and so on, and not creating confusion. So large object millimeters, click open, and it's gonna pretty much look identical, but you straight away will know, because you're going to File, New, and you go large object millimeters, your units are now set up to be millimeters. So, interface of Rhino, when you open it for the first time, always will look like this. Might have a slight differences if you're using Mac, but again, they're only subtle. So we have 4 viewports, and you can click in between them. If you can see that the name of the viewports are becoming blue if you're clicking on them. You can zoom in and out of each of them. You have your top, front, and right view, which represent your orthographic projections. So you're not going to have any perspective distortion if you produce any form of a drawing or a model in it. So you're going to have your floor plan or a top view, and you're also going to have your 2 side elevations. So one from a front, one from the right, or if you want, you can always change it to, for example, to be back or be in left, and so on and so on. And your 4th viewport, which is the top right one, is your perspective window. If you click, hold, and drag your mouse, your right click of your mouse, you can see that you can actually rotate the view. If you click on an arrow next to the viewport, there is an option to maximize this viewport. By using the wheel on your mouse, you can either zoom in or zoom out. If you click, hold, and drag your right click on your mouse, you can rotate the view. Double click on a word again to maximize it or restore it back to the 4 main viewports. So just get the feel of it. How do you navigate around your 4 viewports? So again, we're going to be starting with interface just to cover the basics so you know what is actually happening on your screen. So things that you need to know. So Rhino is something like a mix between any other 3D packages you've been working with. So it's something similar, it has similarities between SketchUp, 3ds Max, even a little bit maybe of Vectorworks. It's something, it's like a beautiful somewhere in between. So if there is something that you haven't liked in any other packages, Rhino has probably fixed it, and it's probably going to be your favorite software. Personally, it's one of my favorite 3D modeling packages. Again, you can do pretty much anything you want. And there are also different ways to model in Rhino, which is also the beauty of it. You can also set up any forms of shortcuts, the same as in any other softwares, but also you can either use commands, the same as you would, for example, do in AutoCAD. So you, for example, you can just start typing box, or you can start typing join, and you can see on the top of your screen there is a command bar where all your commands will appear. So exactly the same as in AutoCAD. Some of you might prefer typing commands. You can start typing command and it will appear on the list. And the good thing as well is that if for some reason you don't remember the command, but you remember, oh, it's definitely started with O, you can start typing its name as the beginning of your command, and all the commands that start from the same letter will appear. So that's one way to work in Rhino. You also have all your tools, which are on the left here. So you have your standard curves, you also have your basic 3D objects, you have your modify tools. So you have like, how many of you guys have used AutoCAD before? Hands up. Okay, yeah, impressive. So the beauty of Rhino as well is that a lot of commands are shared with AutoCAD. So you're gonna have your join, explode, trim, split, array, offset, and so on and so on. So all of those commands you've already been familiar with, you're going to be using the same thing here in Rhino. I also suggest, if you're keen to be learning Rhino properly, I would suggest get yourself a little notebook and start writing down the commands, because the same as in AutoCAD, there are so many of the commands, and you think that you remembered all of them. I can promise you in 2 days' time, you're going to be, what was that command? I don't remember. What is it and what does it do? So get yourself a little notebook and start writing down the commands, at least for the first time. So again, you have all your tools on the left, or you can start typing your command. So polyline, line, or circle, and so on and so on. Or you also have an option in those drop-down menus. So all your tools and all your commands are in those drop-down menus here. So get like a minute to have a look what the tools are there. Have a look where they also repeating themselves. So if you have your main tools on the left toolbar, can you find the same tools on the drop-down menus? Just get a feel of it. Okay, so let's go on. So we have tools on the left, and now we're going to quickly look what's happening on the right side of the screen. So you can see that there are a couple of options that you can click in between. So you have properties, you have layers that look like a little bit of a slice of cake. You have rendering, materials, libraries, and so on and so on. So the main ones that you'll be constantly using is going to be properties, and it's going to be your layers. So those two wires are going to be constantly in use for you. You can also drag them one by one and move it around if you want to. I sometimes prefer to have properties either next to my layers or underneath it. So you can just click, hold, and drag if you want to. So the same, I can see all my layers and all my properties of the current object at the same time. So that's my way, that's how I prefer to work it. You can move it around wherever you want it. You can have it floating if you want. Don't know why would you want that, but you can. For those who are going to be using Mac at home, this is going to be something similar, because you're going to have your properties on the bottom of the screen here, and you're going to have layers just above it. So if you're really used to using Mac, this might be a way to go. So right now we don't have anything drawn, we don't have a single object created in our scene. And as you can see, if you go to your properties, properties just give you general information about your viewports. It doesn't have anything selected to give you information about. But if you start creating an object, so for example, if I start typing box, and I create a simple box, you can see it on all 4 viewports. If I select it, good to know that everything that's in yellow, it means that it's selected in Rhino. So please make sure you don't change the color of an object to yellow, because in that point everything's going to look selected and it's going to give you a headache. Now my object is selected. Properties start to give me information about this current object. So you can straight away see where this object is located, what type of an object is it, what color this object has, what line type, and so on and so on. If you click anywhere on a gray space around the object, it will deselect it, and straight away the properties give you general information about viewport and not about the current object. So again, try to create a box or a sphere. If you don't want to constantly be typing box, sphere, or any other shapes, on your toolbar on the left, straight in the middle, there is a box tool. And there is actually a little arrow next to it. So if you click on this little arrow, click and hold, you can see there are basic 3D objects that you can be using in Rhino. So let's start playing with them just to get the idea how things are laid out and how they work in Rhino. You can also maximize your perspective view by double-clicking on the word perspective. So you have a little bit more of a working space, a little bit more of a canvas to work with. So if you start working with 3D objects, right now you look on the screen and it's like, this doesn't look like a cube. What is this? It's because we're currently on the wireframe mode. So there are a couple of modes in Rhino that you're going to be playing with. So if you click on the arrow next to the viewport that you want to be changing, so for example, I'm on perspective view, I have a little arrow pointing down, and it says that I'm currently on a wireframe. Change it to shaded, and straight away you're going to see that you've just created a 3D object that has a volume. So I'm going to leave it on the screen. So from wireframe, change it to shaded. You can also see there are different options, so it's not only limited to wireframe and shaded. You also have a beautiful option for rendered view. That straight away starts to look quite nice, with just one click of a button. You also have ghosted, so you can see through the object if you want to. Could be quite useful if you need to attach another object to that far corner, for example. Flick through those options, so you have X-ray, technical, artistic, pan, and so on and so on. But please be aware that realistically, you're going to be only limiting yourself to using wireframe, shaded, and rendered mode. Maybe you can be used more often. You can be using ghosted in comparison to other options. But make sure that you're not setting up every single one of your viewports to, for example, a rendered view. You can if you want, as long as your model is not too complex. Because if you start to change every single one of your viewports to a rendered view, it could be that your model starts to get too heavy, you run out of RAM, and you're not going to be able to open it again. So it's a good practice to keep only one of the viewports to the rendered view. So what we usually suggest is keep your top, front, and right viewports as wireframe, and your perspective, you can either keep it on shaded or on rendered. It doesn't sound like too big of a problem if you have only a couple of objects, or maybe like a floor plan and maybe a couple of walls built in Rhino. But as the year progresses, you're going to have much more complex projects going on. You're going to have enormous amount of 3D objects in your model. And it might be working absolutely fine while you're still in Rhino, exactly what Jay said. But the moment you saved it and close your Rhino, there is potential that you're not going to be able to open it again. And it's going to be a lot of tears. So your orthographic view, so your top, right, and front, left, whatever you set it up, try to keep it to wireframe. Your perspective, you can either keep it on shaded, or if you want, you can keep it on rendered. Okay, so let's quickly go over layers. So we have properties as our first bar on the right. The next one is layers. Again, looks like a small cake. If you're on the correct template, so if you're on a large object millimeters, as standard, you will have layer from 01 to 05 coming up as standard. It has different colors pre-assigned, and you already straight away have a default layer automatically. If for some reason when you open your Rhino file for the first time and it doesn't have the same amount of layers, you're probably on the wrong template. So your layers from default to layer 5, they're standard, they automatically comes with this template. You can keep using them, or you can delete all layers except the current layer and create your own ones. Again, I can't stress enough how important is it to be working correctly with layers. Do not leave it until last minute. So if you have models that you work in, for example, you know that your final outcome of a model will need to be rendered, and you, for example, making a skyscraper, and you have 50 floors, and every one of those floors has 50 windows. So 50 elements are going to be representing glazing. You will not want to go 10 hours before deadline, selecting every single glazing, move it into separate layer, apply a different material to it. Make sure that when you model something, put it straight away in the correct layer. So if you have doors, put it on one layer. If you have glazing, if you have panels that's going to be concrete, put it on separate layers. So if you know they're going to have different materials, put them on separate layers. It's a good practice, okay? Again, if you have 10, maybe 20 objects, it's fine. It's not too big of a deal. If you're working on a master plan, or if you have enormous skyscrapers that you're designing, you will not want to do that later on, okay? So just learning from the beginning, start using your layers. Layers are really straightforward in Rhino. So let's try to select all of them except the default and just click big red cross that says delete. This will leave you just with the current layers that are called default, and you're going to start completely from scratch. So delete all layers except default. So you can either select one, click delete on your keyboard, or you can select a couple of them, click and hold shift, for example, and click delete. So you're always going to have at least one layer left behind. So there is no way not to have any layers at all. So your object is always at least on one of the layers. So for us, it's default layer. So we're going to create a new one. So it's this first button that looks like a clean piece of paper with a folded corner on top. It's actually, if you hover over it, it says new layer. Click on it. You have yourself a new layer. Straight away, it's asking you, do you want to rename this layer? So give it a name. Call it a box, or I don't know, Bob, anything you want. You can also right click on a layer, and one of the options is going to be to rename it. If you have 50 layers, trust me, you're going to be grateful if you rename them straight away. So now you should have on the screen a couple of 3D objects, a couple of standard basic 3D objects that you put on your canvas. Everyone managed to draw at least 1 or 2 objects? Do you have someone who doesn't have anything on their screen right now? Okay. So select one of the objects and have a look at properties. And specifically, we are looking at the layer. So it's going to tell you on which layers this object is currently located. So I have the box selected, and it says that current layer this object is on is called default. If I know that this object needs to be on a different layer, I can just go to layers, right click on a layer, and just say change object layer. So Rhino is really logical software. Pretty much whatever you want it to do, it's exactly how the command called. Change object layer. So select an object, choose a layer which one you want to move it to, right click on that layer and go change object layer. And now if I have a look at properties again, with this box selected, it says that layer this object is currently on is called box. Or there is another way, could be maybe a little bit faster if you prefer it. Select an object, and in your properties where it says default as a layer, just click on the name of that layer and choose where do you want to move this object to. So I want you guys to now model 5, 7 different objects, so basic 3D objects that you can find. Create individual layers for each of those objects, rename them, and paste the object into that layer. So for example, I have a box, I have a sphere, so I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to call it sphere. I'm going to select a 3D object, and I'm going to move this sphere into the appropriate layer. Again, if you just been a bit late and you don't know where to find your basic 3D objects, there is on your left where you have a toolbar, you have a little box appearing, and if you click and hold, you can see there are a lot of different options for basic 3D objects that you can choose from. If you're struggling to create a 3D object, you will need to constantly read what it says on your command line. So when you choose an object or you choose a tool, Rhino always tells you instructions. What do you need to do? So I have selected an object. So for example, I want to create this cone. And I need to start looking at the command bar on the top. And it says exactly what do I need to do. So I need to specify a base of a cone. So I click anywhere on the screen. It's now asking me for a radius. So right now we're not using any measurements, so we're just eyeballing, we're just practicing. So you can either type specific radius that you want, or you can just click anywhere on your screen when you're happy with the radius of the object. And you can see that now, in perspective view, I can see that it's asking me to specify the height for this cone. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to play with it. Okay guys, let's go on. So now everyone played with different basic 3D objects. You hopefully by now moved it to its individual layers. But what I have right now on the screen with the shaded view, I cannot easily see which object on which layer. So there is a way around it. So where you have your layers, there are a couple of options. So you can either set up it to be default, so it has this little tick next to this layer. So if you set up, for example, if you know that you constantly, in the next half an hour, you're going to be working on Windows, so you set up yourself a separate layer called Windows, you can make it default, and it means that everything that you're going to create at this moment is going to be appearing on this layer that you have just selected. So by double-clicking a layer, you can change which one is the current layer you're working on. There's also an option to make a layer invisible, the little light bulb. So it's going to turn everything off that's currently on that layer. You can also lock the layer so you don't accidentally move it. So for example, if you have a floor plan or a section that you're using as a reference and you don't want to accidentally move it when you create a wall or 3D object, you can lock the layer and you're not going to accidentally move it. And next one is a color that you can give to a layer. So double click on a black box and choose which color do you want. Some colors are going to be a bit easier to see than others on the gray background of Rhino, so just make sure that you don't use, for example, gray on gray or light blue on a gray background, which is just going to give you eye strain. So choose a color that's going to be clearly visible. And you can change it for each layer. And as long as you're on a shaded mode, you can see that now all objects that you've set up are changing color accordingly. So if your box, for example, or your sphere on an appropriate layer, and you give a layer a specific color, every single object on that layer is going to have the same color. This is really useful when you have hundreds and hundreds of different objects. You can see exactly which object is located on which layer. This works well on a shaded view and on wireframe view as your main ones, but it will not work on your rendered view. So because we're constantly talking about wireframe, shaded, and rendered, that's going to be probably your most common ones that you're going to be using. You can play with the different ones. So for example, X-ray and ghosted. Also going to have the colors pre-assigned based on the layer. But again, we're trying to avoid using those ones. But if you go to rendered, you can see that colors that you assigned by a layer is not visible in the rendered view. So when you're on the rendered view, you will need to set up materials to your objects later on. Again, we're not going to be going as far as applying materials to your objects today, but it's just good to know that if you want to see different colors that you assign to layers, you probably will need to be on a main shaded view. And just quickly, the final two things that we need to know for the basic interface introduction is going to be on the bottom of your screen. So you should have a series of boxes appearing here on the bottom. So it's end, near, point, mid, center, and so on. If you don't have those, make sure that you go even lower and you click on OSnap tools. So make sure that this is ticked and you have this bar appearing on the bottom of a screen. So those are your snap tools. Has everyone managed to find the snap tools? So if you don't have it, if your screen looks the same as my one right now, just make sure that you go to the bottom of a screen and you click on O Snap, and it will pop up. So the idea behind those tools, those commands, if you need to draw something, if it's the 2D like floor plan or it's a 3D object, and in architecture school we're always trying to be as accurate as we can. So for example, if you know that you need to start one object, or for example one curve starting from the corner of a room as an example, doesn't matter how close you're going to be zooming in, if you don't have your snaps on, you're not going to be able to go as accurate. You're always going to have this slight annoying gap in between. So your snap tools will help you to literally snap to an object. So let's start with the end one. So make sure that your end snap is ticked. Start a new object, so for example another box, and you can see that if you hover over the object, you can see that close to the corners you have a little word appearing next to your cursor, and it's gonna say end. You can almost feel that your mouse is getting attached to it. So just hover over the object, find the corner, and you will see that the word end appearing. It just means that now the object that you're drawing right now is going to be starting exactly at the corner of a previous object. So it doesn't matter how close I'm going to zoom in, those objects, two objects are always going to meet on the corners. The same thing if you're creating a 2D drawing. So if you go on the top view, so if you've been to perspective, just go on the top view. If you want to start drawing your second object exactly from a corner, or for example, if you have vector and you want to start a second line that you draw exactly from the beginning or the end of the original one, with end snaps on, you'll be able to do so. The next snap tool is near, which is also quite useful, but I would suggest turn it on only when you need it to. Don't keep it constantly on, because the idea behind the near snap is that you're going to be able to start your new object anywhere on the edge. So not only on the corners, or not only on the beginning or end of a curve, but anywhere along the other object. So if you hover over the edge of your object, you can see the word near appearing. So yeah, near is really, really useful, but it can get annoying if you have a lot of objects. So imagine, so if you can snap anywhere on the edge of an object, so edge of a desk, for example, but you also have an end snap on the corner. You can snap anywhere as close to this corner as you can if you have near snap on. And it could be really tricky if you're not zoomed in enough, that you, instead of going in a corner, you're going to be snapping somewhere on the edge. So only have near if you need it on. But end one, you're pretty much always going to have on. You also have mid and center. So you're not going to be using all of those snaps. They're there, so it's good to know that they're there if you need to. So for example, you have such tools as points, and you can snap to them if you want to. It's good to know that it's there. You also have midpoint and center point. So if on the top view, I'm going to create a circle. So circle is just here, or you can just type a command circle. Yeah.
What's the difference between point and end?
So if you just have a point, one second. So if you have a point just turned on and you don't have an end snap to it, snap on, you're actually not going to be able to snap to the edges and to the ends of a vertex. It's only going to be able to connect to snap to the point. So point is a separate tool. So as you have lines, circles, rectangles, point is a separate tool. Okay. So end, mid, and center is probably going to be the most ones that you're going to be constantly using. So let's go back to top view. And if you have a circle and you know that you need to start a curve that going exactly from the center point of the circle. There is no way without snaps that you're going to be able to find where the center point of the circle is. So if you click center, which is fifth one, you can see that now if I hover over the circle itself, it almost wants to drag my cursor to the middle of the circle. It's a center point. For some reason, if you go in the middle of a circle, it's not going to be able to snap it. So you just need to hover over the edge of a circle, click once, and you're going to be able to start drawing your curve straight from the middle of it. So it could be a little bit tricky. So try to play with couple of circles, turn on the center snap on, and try to snap with a different object. You also have a middle, so you have a center and you have a middle. So middle is a really useful one. So middle one is allowing you to find a midpoint on an edge or on a curve or on any object. So for example, if you have a cube, you can easily find a middle of it, middle of the edge of the object. So just hover over the 3D object or 2D object somewhere closer to the middle of the edge and it will snap you straight to the middle of it. So these ones are going to be probably the most common ones that you're going to be using. Again, there are a couple of more extra options in there. We're going to go in through them later, but the main ones are going to be your end, mid, and center. You can also disable any snaps at all. So if you have a lot of objects and everything suddenly starts to snap to each other, which could be a little bit of a nightmare. Usually it happens 24 hours before deadline and when you start to have an eye twitch. So click disable and it will not snap to anything. So you don't need to manually go in and tick every single one. Just click on disable and you will not be able to snap to anything. Another really important tool that you're going to be constantly using in Rhino is Gumbo. It's also appearing on the bottom of the screen. Straight in the middle, it says Gumbo. Make sure that it's ticked. Go to the perspective view and you'll see what the Gumbo tool is for. So if your Gumbo tool is on, if you select an object, you start to have this little creature appearing in the middle of your object. It has 3 arrows pointing opposite directions if you're on a perspective view. If you're on any of orthographic views, you're only going to have 2 arrows appearing. So for example, if I select one of those rectangles that I have drawn, I have Gumbo in the middle and have 2 arrows pointing different directions. So this represents coordinate system. So you have X, Y, and you have height Z. So if you're on your perspective view, you select an object, you can see 3 arrows pointing upwards. If you're not sure which one's which, on the bottom left corner of your viewport, you have a little icon just here. And it says X, Y, and Z. So those arrows are going to be accordingly representing X, Y, and Z. So Gumbo is really useful tool. So this saves you quite a bit of time of, instead of typing the command on looking at drop-down menus, you have a Gumbo for moving an object. So for example, if I want to move this object away, I can just click and hold on the red arrow that's representing, I can see on the bottom left corner that it's representing the X axis. I can move my object on X, Y, and I can move it on H, on Z, sorry, on height. I can also scale an object. Instead of typing scale and figure out the scale factor, the Gumbo has a scale tool built into it. So if you look closely, you can see that away from your arrows, you have dotted lines with a little square on the end. And they have the same colors as your arrows, so they're green, red, and blue. If you click and drag one of those boxes, it's gonna start scaling the object based on the axis that you're using. So for example, I want to scale it on y-axis, so on the green one. So it's almost gonna stretch it out. It's gonna scale it in one direction. There is an option to scale uniformly. So if you click and hold Shift on your keyboard, it's gonna scale in all directions. It's gonna scale in 3D. So click and hold Shift on your keyboard. Use the scale tool on your Gumbo to scale your object accordingly. Make sense? Or is there any questions? Also on your Gumbo tool, you have those little arcs appearing. So blue, red, and green again. Those are your rotate tool. So instead of typing rotate and figuring out the angles that you want to rotate it to, if you only eyeball it, you can click, hold, and drag one of those arcs, and it's going to rotate it based on the axis that you have selected. I'm expecting some of you don't have that much of a freedom of rotation. It could be because you have Orso ticked on. So the second option on the bottom screen, on the bottom part of the screen, is Orso. So Orso is the same as, for example, you might have heard of it or used it in AutoCAD. So it snaps to specific angles. So for example, as a standard, it will allow you to draw or rotate your object exactly onto 90 degrees. You can manually set up to any other degree. So for example, if you know that you constantly need to be rotating an object to 45 degrees or 30 degrees, you can always change it. So it's gonna, if your Orso is on, it means that it's going to be constantly rotating or drawing something to those angles that you specify. As a standard, it's 90 degrees. So if Orso is on and you're trying to rotate your object using Gumbo, it will only rotate it by 90 degrees. Just quickly, just because I mentioned about Orso, if you want to change it from 90 degrees to any other angles, right click on the word Orso, and there are options for settings. And you can see that the new window appeared. It says Orso snap every 90 degrees. If you change it to, for example, 45 and press OK, now your object is going to be rotating every 45 degrees. So just good to know. Right click on the Orso, go to settings, and change snap of Orso to any other degrees except 90. Now some of you might have a lot of objects appearing on their scene and start to get a little bit too difficult to navigate around it. So again, we can either zoom in with the wheel on your mouse. We can right click on the mouse and just drag orbit around your object. Or there is a really useful command. If you have one of the objects that you want to specifically zoom into, especially if you have a large model and you want to zoom into the specific wardrobe or specific chair on 15th floor, you can select an object, you can find it, so either in your layers or you can manually click on it. There is really useful command, and you just need to type it ZSA, 3 letters, ZSA. Zoom selected all. So it will zoom you in to everything that you currently have selected. So for example, if you're too far away from your model and you have something selected and you don't want to be constantly scrolling in, just type ZSA. It will zoom in to the object you have selected. Or again, there is a different option. So if you're too far and you want to zoom in to do your whole model, or it maybe you're not opposite, maybe you're too zoomed into one object and you want to see the whole thing straight away. ZEA, so again 3 letters. So without having anything selected, ZEA is going to show you the whole model on the screen. But zoom selected all, ZSA, is absolutely brilliant. So if you select an object, so for example, all your 4 viewports could be zoomed into like a different object. If you type ZSA with object selected and press enter, all your 4 main viewports is going to zoom in straight away to that object. So you can see your object in every single orthographic way possible and in perspective as well. So ZSA is going to be your best friend. So they also appear in here, but they're not in drop downs, which is really annoying. But it is going to be really useful, especially when you move forward to, for example, any rendering packages. So for example, twin motions that we're going to be covering. If you have models that you based on the map that you can got from Digimap, as Jay said, it's probably going to appear somewhere far in the galaxy, and you're going to be constantly working next to it. So it's like it's fine. You don't know where it's located on your canvas because you have this unlimited canvas in Rhino that you're going to be working on. You could be a couple of kilometers away from a 0 point. When you open your Twinmotion or any other rendering packages, and suddenly you import your model in and it's not appearing, and it's like, what's happening? It's actually just because it's located so far away. So if you do open your model to ZEA and you can straight away see where it's located, you can, for example, move it to the 0 coordinates, so you can straight away find in any different packages. So if you do in rendering, so it's going to straight away open in the middle, or you just get the idea where it's located. Yes, I can quickly show you how it's done. So for example, so this little grid that you have appearing on your screen every time you open, you can see that it's whereas your green and red axis meet. So this is your 0 point, so it's the beginning of a coordinate. For example, if you want this object or your 3D model or your map, if you want it to be in the beginning of a coordinates in 0, what you can do is you can start typing command move. So select an object, type command move, and it's asking you to choose a point to move from. So for example, I want one of the corners, make sure that your end snap is on, so you can snap to one of those corners, be in the beginning of a coordinates in 0. So just click once, type 0, press enter, and now my object, and specifically the corners that I have selected, move to the beginning of a coordinates. So again, if I move this somewhere far away, for example here, I cannot see it on my screen, have it selected, I type ZSA to zoom into everything that I currently have on the screen. I select everything, there is a shortcut, so Control A will select everything, so just write it down. Control A or Command A if you're using Mac will select everything that you have on your canvas right now. You start typing command move, choose a point that you want to become a 0, move to the 0 coordinates, so for example corner of this rectangle, click once, and just simply as that, type 0, press enter. And now, right now you don't have anything appearing on your viewports. The ZSA to select again, and you can see that the coordinates that I have selected is now appearing exactly in the beginning of the coordinates. Make sense? If for some reason you don't want to move your object, exactly what you asked, but you still want to come back to the beginning of a coordinates instead of constantly zooming in and out, what I sometimes do is choose a point, single point, type 0, and just leave a single point in the 0 coordinates. So you're going to be able to select this point and come back to it. So if you zoom in, you can see that in the beginning of a coordinates, you have a single point that's located exactly on the 0 coordinates. And that's a really good thing to know as well. So specifically with points, so they're obviously really tiny little things, so you don't want to be constantly zooming in and selecting on it. There is a way to select different objects based on the type of the object it is. So what you can do, you can go edit, as there is an option to select objects. This is really good, I suggest you write that down. So this is a way to quickly select an object or multiple objects based on its characteristics. So it's something similar to select similar in Illustrator if you used it before. So edit, select objects, and you have all the different possible types of object you can ever create. And what we're looking for here is points. So click on that, and just above the command line, it's going to say that you have two points added to selection. If you created just a 1 point, which is in the 0 coordinates, in the beginning of your coordinates, you can just select your point and just type ZSA, and you're now exactly in the beginning of the coordinates. So again, edit, select objects, and here all your options. That's also a useful thing if you have, for example, if you start bringing a floor plan from AutoCAD, and you have, as an example, a lot of hatches applied to your floor plan. Instead of going and manually selecting every single hatch and deleting them if you don't want them, there is an option to go Edit, Select Objects, and there is an option for hatches just here. So again, it's going to select the whole group of objects based on its characteristics. So if it's a curve, it's going to select all the curves on your 3D model. If it's a mesh, it's gonna select all the meshes, and so on and so on. So really useful thing to know. Before we start moving into something a little bit more architectural, I'm gonna quickly mention about all different methods of 3D modeling in Rhino, which is a key principle, so the key information that you need to know about Rhino. So if you still have the same canvas that you were working before, if you're not too emotionally attached to it, do Ctrl-A and delete it. Ctrl-A will select everything that you currently have on your screen, and just click delete to have a nice clean empty canvas. Okay, so main different types of geometry in Rhino that you can be using. So the beauty of Rhino is that you can be working in 2D and in 3D as well. So for 2D tools, you have all your options on top here. So you have your points, you have your line, or you have your polyline. Make sure that your ortho is off. So the same thing as, for example, in AutoCAD, you have your polyline, and until you press enter, it's going to continue drawing. You can also just type line if you want a single vector. Yeah, so you have your ortho on. So if you have lines that constantly drawing exactly at 90 degrees, it just means that you have ortho on the bottom part of a screen. The good thing to know is that you don't need to constantly have your ortho on and off. So for example, if you constantly prefer to work without it, untick it. But if you suddenly need to draw something at 90 degrees, click and hold Shift, and it will turn ortho on temporarily. So click and hold Shift will toggle ortho on and off. You have your circle, you have your ellipse tool, you have your rectangle. So all the same as, for example, in AutoCAD. You have your points. Again, you can just put a single point on the page. What's important is that we want to show you what is quite different and unique to Rhino's this specific session. There's going to be different types of 3D objects that you can create. So I'm going to go to standard 3D shape, and I'm going to find torus, which I'm completely refusing to call it like that. To me, it's a donut. So create yourself a donut, because why not? And this object is using a method that's called Nurbs Modeling. So does anyone here knows what NURB is standing for? N-U-R-B. So NURBs, so N-U-R-B, so we have non-uniform rational B-splines. You'll never ever need to remember what the hell is this. The main word here is spline. So what does it mean? That to create this shape or any other NURB geometry, it's using the mathematical algorithm to create this geometry. So what does it do? Yes, that's a perfect explanation of what the spline is. So it's a type of a curve. So what is happening here? So as you can see, if you're on a shaded view or even if you're on a wireframe, that the object consists of curves or wireframe. Those are splines. So what is happening when you create a NURB object? You have a specific amount of splines that going around your object, and the software is calculating how does it want to fill the space between those curves. That's a NURB object. So what can I do is select an object, and I can type for example, extract a wireframe. And you can see that now I have a wireframe that existed of those splines that made up that object. So software is using a mathematical algorithm to fill up the space between those curves. That's Nurbs. Another way of 3D modeling Rhino is there is different type of an object. It's called mesh. So what mesh are? So on the top you can see different options, different drop-down menus, and you have solid objects and you have meshes. So mesh just here. So I made a duplicate of an object of a donut. So how I've done that, just quickly. So select your torus or donut with your Gumbo on, click and hold Alt on your keyboard and drag one of the arrows. So Alt on your keyboard will create a copy of an object. So instead of moving it around, if you click hold Alt and move it to the side, it will create a duplicate of it. So I want to transform the solid object, this Nurbs object, into a mesh. So I select the second object, the duplicate. I'm going to go to mesh, and I'm going to choose the first option. So I want to create a mesh from Nurbs object. You can see it actually says from Nurbs object. Click on that, and you're going to have a little window appearing. So it's going to ask you for polygon mesh options. Yep.
Can you explain again how to create a duplicate?
Yep.
When I press R,
So to create a duplicate, you have your object. Make sure your Gumbo is on. You have Gumbo on? On the bottom screen, Gumbo on. So select an object, click on one of the arrows and drag it. This will move an object, right? But if you click and hold Alt next on your keyboard, click and hold, and after click and drag one of your arrows, this will create a copy of it. Now I want you to transform the solid object, this Nurbs object, into mesh. So select a second object, the copy that you just made, go mesh, and transform it from a Nurbs object. And when a new window appears, it's going to ask you how many polygons do you want this object to have. Let's start with the smallest amount. So drag the whole thing to the bottom, to the left, and just press OK. Okay, so when you click mesh from Nurbs object, you can actually start to see that there are two objects appearing at the same time. You can click and drag one of them to the side, and you can see that we have a new torus appearance. It looks slightly different. So I want you to do the same thing a couple of times. So select an object, go mesh from Nurbs object, but this time try to change it to somewhere in the middle amount of polygons, and press OK. And do another one, another donut, mesh from Nurbs object, and choose the most amount of polygons. Press OK. So you should have something similar on your screen. So those three final donuts that we have created, those called meshes. So this is a different type of geometry in Rhino. So instead of creating splines and building the spaces in between, these objects are created from polygons. So they're flat surfaces, and the more of those surfaces, the more of those polygons you have, the curvier your object is going to be. But if you can see that if you start zooming in close enough to an object, it's going to start to look jagged. So more polygons you have inside of your mesh, the curvier the object is going to be. So this is just a different method, different type of modeling. You have Nurbs modeling and you have polygonal modeling. So you have solid objects, which are Nurbs, and you have meshes. Both of them have their own advantages and disadvantages. One is good for one thing, one is good for another thing. So for example, we're going to be mostly focusing on the Nurbs modeling. So you're going to create solid objects, so it's your first donut that you have created. But if you start to have a really large model appearing with a lot of elements, and you start to union those elements into one single shape, this when your file start to get really heavy. So imagine if you had two cubes and you unioned it into one single object, straight away you have a complex object with a lot of splines. So computer every single time need to think, how to fill up the space between those splines. So your file is starting to get really heavy. Meshes in comparison is going to start to get lighter because it's all about the amount of polygons you have. And it's also important to know that, for example, if you export in your file for 3D print or bring it into different software, or for example, if you bring in another model from a SketchUp, for example, it's always going to come as a mesh into Rhino. So it's good to know how to work with meshes and what they are. Has anyone ever worked in SketchUp before? SketchUp? Has anyone ever noticed a horrible way to draw circles in SketchUp when it starts to get all jagged and there is no way to fix this? So this is the same thing. This is a polygonal way of modeling. When you start zooming too close to an object, you start to see the jagged lines. So it creates polygonal objects that create your curvature. But if you start to look too close, if your object is located too close to the camera or to you, you start to see those little imperfections. Okay? Have anything to add? Okay. Yeah, so we have Nurbs and we have meshes. Good to know how both of them work. Also, for example, if you start downloading any data from online, so there are tons of different websites that allows you to download or buy 3D models out there. Most of the times they're going to come as OBJ or FBX files, and most of the times they're going to come as meshes, and sometimes they're getting ridiculously heavy. So you straight away can see how dense the mesh is that you cannot see the color of the object straight away. 1-2 objects like that in your model will be fine. If you start having the plants on every single floor of your skyscraper, your file is going to start to get too heavy because every single plant is too dense. So what you need to do, you need to use a command that's called reduce mesh. You can reduce amount of polygons that your mesh is consist of. Yeah. Yes, Rhino is one of the softwares that can pretty much accept any other file format. So whatever other your software is using, most likely Rhino is going to open it. So you're going to be able to open this file and save it again into a different format if you want to open it somewhere else. So Rhino is beautiful for that. Also, specifically for Rhino 7, you also have a different type of 3D modeling, which is called sub-D. So on the top here, you have sub-D, solids, and meshes. So sub-D is specifically the new type of modeling for Rhino 7. Has anyone ever used 3ds Max in here? So it's something similar to that. So you can easily control how you can model using the edges and points and polygons of the current object. So again, we're not going to go too far into sub-D because it's a little bit more advanced, but sub-D tools, just quickly. So sub-D tools, something in between of a Nurbs modeling and mesh modeling. So you have an option to work with rigid object, and you also have a way to see how it's going to look like all smoothed out. So again, it's also sub-Ds are also working with splines, but it has this beauty of a smoothed out curves that would other types of modeling would give you. So the beauty of sub-D, again, I'm not asking you to go over it as well. Again, it's a little bit more advanced, but it's good to know what it can do exactly. So the idea is that, so for example, if I create a cube, which is going to be a sub-D, and I'm going to change the wireframe of it into, for example, 3, 3, and 3. You have two simple cubes, but if you click and hold tab, if you click tab on your keyboard, this is going to smooth your object out. And what you can do is you can start working specifically with edges, polygons, and vertices. So what you can do by click and hold Shift and Control, you can select polygons in between, you can delete them. And if I click tab on my keyboard, you can see how it looks rigid, more simplified. And what you can do, you can bridge those two objects in between. So you have sub-D tools, and you have bridge, which is this one, bridge, mesh, or sub-Ds. and you can select two openings on opposite side. So select the first one, press enter, select the second one, enter again, and it's going to bridge those objects in between. Nothing too spectacular right now, okay? We can increase the amount of segments, press OK. If I click tab, it's now smoothed out. To model something like that from scratch using Nurbs and meshes could be a little bit more time consuming. With sub D, it's much faster. Let's try. So if I start with a cube and make a copy of it. So if you do shift and control at the same time, you're going to be able to select either an edge or a polygon itself.
Wait, what does it select?
So shift and control at the same time will allow you to select either edges or polygons. And you just click on the bridge option.
I'm sorry, I know you explained it.
It's fine.
On my phone. How did you make it smooth?
It's tab key on your keyboard.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
So you can do quite quirky stuff. So for example, you don't necessarily need to select just a one polygon. You can select multiple. And you can just click bridge. And it will bridge two objects in between. You can start selecting not only polygons, but also edges. Yep.
So how do you directly select the face?
So do you shift and control on your keyboard at the same time?
Yeah.
And if you double click inside of a polygon, you're going to select a polygon. If you click on one of the edges, it's going to select an edge.
Got it. Thank you.
And then here is where Gumbo tool is really useful. So if you select one of the polygons, so for example, you can either move it up and down. You can, for example, start scaling it. Or you can also start extruding those polygons. So if you look closely into your, if you look closely into your Gumbo, on the arrows where you're moving an object, there's a little circle on each of the arrows. If you click and drag the circle while your polygons are selected, this will do an extrusion. So if I click just on the tab to make it a little bit more simplified. Guys, come on. You can make an extrusion. Yeah. So division of the squares. So if you go to sub D and you create a new box, sub D box, on the top in the command you have X count, Y count, and Z count. So it's how many divisions you're gonna have. That's actually good to know as well. So with sub Ds, the bigger the divisions, the more of those wireframes, the more complex the wireframe is, the more exact the shape it's gonna keep. So for example, if I'm gonna go into the sub D box and it's asking me to specify the first corner, you can see that in brackets it's asking me what the count do I want to use. So before that I was using 3 by 3 count. If I change it to 1, enter, Y count as 1, Z count as 1, and I create a box, which in a normal view, rigid view, is going to look like a normal box. But if I click tab again, it's almost starting to look like something sphere-like. But if I create the same box by using a larger X count, Y count, and Z count, so for example, if I change it to, let's call 10, 10, and Z count 10 again. So the same box, but you can see the difference. It has more amount of polygons that trying to keep the shape as it is. It's only smoothing out the corners. The less amount of polygons you have, the smaller the division is, the more smoothed out the object is going to be. Okay? Okay, so that's again, it's all really briefly, it's just to get the idea of what's the difference between Nurbs, what's the difference between meshes, and what's the difference between sub Ds. Again, sub D is a little bit more advanced, it's a little bit more quirkier, and it's new for Rhino 7. Hopefully we'll have a session specifically for modeling in sub D. But the main idea for you to understand is difference between NURBS and meshes. Okay, so let's start moving into something actually a little bit more architectural. So can I ask you all to go to ADD Moodle page? And what we need is weekly workshops. So we need to go to Rhino, workshop 1. And you can see that on this page, you actually have a link. So it says, please download following files for the session. Barcelona Pavilion tech package. So hopefully everyone found the file. Inside of that file, you should have a tech drawings for Barcelona Pavilion. So you have a section, 2 elevations, and a floor plan. We're going to be using that, and we're going to be pasting this into Rhino and create a 3D model out of it. So the easiest way, usually that's how we start modeling, for example, our precedent studies, or for example, you have a site and you need to model nearest building, or for example, you doing an extension for the building and you need an existing site, you need an existing 3D model. So usually we find our tech drawings, our packages from planning applications, or they're given by you by your tutor, and they're usually in the format of like a PDF if you're lucky. Most time they're just images that you need to trace over. So the easiest way to do so, you need to bring this image into Rhino itself. So the command is the easiest one whatsoever. Just start typing picture. Press enter, and it's going to ask you to navigate where this picture has been saved. Yes. So just click open when you found an image, and it will ask you to place the image into your file. It's going to be exactly the same way as you would, for example, draw a rectangle. So you start from one corner. So click once to start drawing. Click again on the opposite corner. That will give you a rectangle where the picture is going to be placed into. So click once to start, and click again to bring the image into Rhino itself. If you're lucky enough, and if you have your technical drawings given to you as PDF, sometimes those PDFs are saved as vectorized PDF. That means that all the data, all like technical drawings, all the floor plans and elevation actually preserved its vector data. So when you bring the PDF into Rhino, it opens up and straight away it's a full drawn floor plan. So you don't need to trace it over. It saves you like a week of work. Unfortunately, we're not always as lucky. Most of the time you're going to be given just an image that you need to trace over. Because we're cutting it quite close to the end of the session, I'm actually going to ask you to open a separate file that was inside of the folder that you have just downloaded. So we're going to go File, I'm going to do Open. And the second file that was inside of that folder was Barcelona Pavilion tech drawings. Click Open.
Okay, now we have our file open from Moodle. We can maximize our top view by clicking little arrow next to the word top and click on the word maximize. Or literally we can just double click on the word top and it will pop up the top view massively on the main screen. So what we have here is 3 layers. So we have layer picture that include the image itself with all the technical drawings on it. We can turn it on and off. And we also have a layer called tech drawings that already includes pre-traced section and 2 elevations that I already traced for you just to speed up the process today for this session. So what is left to do is we need to trace this floor plan before we start to actually going into 3D modeling. So first thing first, we need to make sure that we always work in 1:1 scale, and as we have an infinite canvas in Rhino, we can always have a benefit of working one-to-one scale. Always try to follow this rule. Try to work in one-to-one. You can always scale it down if you need to, or scale it up. Okay, so to make sure that everything nice in line, what I would suggest doing first is create a couple of reference lines that can go from edges of your section or elevation upwards, so you know exactly where the boundaries of your floor plans are. So we're going to start by using your Polyline tool. We're going to make sure that our ortho is on. We're going to find the most left edge of our elevation or section. If you have a smart track on, which is just on the bottom of your screen next to OSnap and Gumbo, if you hover over the edge of your elevation or section, it's almost trying to predict what you're going to be doing. So what we're going to do, we're going to start by zooming into our elevation, find the corner, make sure that ortho is on, or just click and hold shift to make sure that your lines are nice and vertical. And we're just going to draw a couple of reference lines from one side and from the other side. If your lines are too slim and you're struggling to see what is happening on your screen, there is a really useful tool. We can go to File, Properties, and it comes up with a new window with a lot of words in a big list on the left. So the one that we need, we're going to be going to the bottom of the list where we have View, little arrow next to it, click on it once. After, we need to find the arrow that points at Display Mode, click again. After, it opens all the modes that you can be working in. Most often we're going to be working with a wireframe, so we're going to go to Wireframe. We need Objects, and we're looking for curves specifically. So View, Display Mode, Wireframe, Objects, Curves. And here we have our main curve settings, and what we need to change is curve width. So right now curve width is set up to be 1 pixel. We want to increase it to, for example, let's try with 3. Press OK, and you can straight away see that now our lines start to get a little bit more chunkier. So if I take Polyline, you can see that when I start drawing a polyline, it looks the same thickness, the same width. But when I finish a polyline, by clicking Enter, you can see that this line is now a little bit more chunky, a little bit easier to see. So we have our 2 reference lines. And what we want to do, we want to scale this image and every single traced technical drawing in it. We want to scale it to 1-to-1 scale. The easiest way to scale in Rhino is either using a scale factor or using a reference of a specific measurement that you have already included in your image or in your technical drawing. So for example, in here we have a single measurement that specifies that from the furthest corner on the left to the furthest corner on the right, we're supposed to have a measurement of 52 meters across. Because when we brought this image into Rhino, we didn't specify what scale we want to include. Right now, we have no idea how big or how small this image is, so we need to specify a scale. So what we want to do, we're going to use a Polyline tool, and we're going to draw a line from one reference to another. Press Enter, and we need to specify that this line that we have just drawn needs to be 52 meters long. Right now we don't know how long is it. So what we're going to be doing, we're going to select everything. So we're going to do Ctrl A to select everything, or it's going to be Command A if you're using a Mac device. And we're going to start typing command scale. And now we just constantly keep reading what it says on a command line just in here. So the first thing first, it's asking us to specify a base point. So base point is a point that when we, so the base point is a point that we select in space that's not going to move anywhere after you scale your object. So the whole object is going to be scaling from this point outwards or inwards. So this is a base point, and now it's asking us to either specify a scale factor or a first reference point. So my reference point is going to be the opposite edge of the lines that we have just drawn. Click again, and you can see that now my drawing is scaling when I just move in my cursor outside of an image or inside. So you can either eyeball it, or you can specify an exact measurement. So we need this drawing to be 52 meters long, so we just start typing 52,000. We press enter, and now our drawing and every single technical drawing within it has been scaled, and now in theory it should be 1:1 scale. To make sure that the measurements are correct and we didn't accidentally mess anything up, we can go to Analyze, Distance, and we can say I want to measure a distance from this corner to this corner. And you can see above the command line it says 52,000 millimeters, which is exactly 52 meters long. Perfect. So now all of the technical drawings, section elevations, and the future floor plan is now into 1:1 scale. I can now delete a curve that represents our distance, our measurement, 52 meters. We don't need it anymore. What I also want to do, I want to separate the floor plan away from a section, elevation, and a short elevation. So I'm going to draw horizontal lines in between. Make sure that your ortho is on, so you have nice straight horizontal lines. And what I'm going to be doing is using a command that's called split. And again, as always, we're just reading what it says about around command line. It says select object to split. We select our piece of paper, we press enter, and now it says select cutting objects. So our cutting objects are going to be the horizontal lines that we just drawn. We press enter, and even though it looks like nothing has happened, if I click on my image, on a piece of paper that has all the drawings on it, I can now move every single piece of paper separately. I don't want to actually do that, so I'm going to do Ctrl-Z to undo it. I can now select my cutting objects. I can delete them. I don't need them anymore. And I want to preserve only my floor plan. I want to hide every single one of split surfaces, our pieces of paper that we don't need anymore. So I'm just going to select one of the objects that have been split. I'm going to type command hide, press enter, and it's now disappeared. If I ever want to bring it back, I'm just going to type command show, press enter, and it appears again. So again, hide. The next one, hide as well, press enter. And the good thing as well about Rhino, to speed up a process a little bit more, if you know that you need to reuse the same command and again, instead of constantly typing, in our situation, hide command, if I know that the command that I've just used was the one that I want to repeat again, I can click on the object that I want to hide, and I can just, without typing the command, just press enter, and Rhino will know that I want to repeat the last command that I've just done. So something to speed up the process. Okay, so now I have my section, I have elevation, and I have a short side elevation. So first thing first, I want to make sure that this image that I have here with the floor plan, I'm not going to accidentally move it left or right. So I want to lock this layer. So you can either do it by typing lock, or because I know that this floor plan is located on a separate layer, on a layer picture, I'm just going to click on the little locker next to it. Now click on that, lock is going to become blue, and now I won't be able to accidentally move it around. Okay, so we're going to start tracing this floor plan over. I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to call it floor plan. I'm also going to change the color of this layer just to make sure it's nice and visible. And I'm going to make this layer current. So make sure that you double click next to the layers that you want to be current. And when you have a tick next to that layer, it means that everything that you're going to be drawing next is going to be appearing on this layer. Okay, So to trace something over, we're going to start with overall shape straight away, and to trace it by using a Polyline tool. So we can either type Polyline, or we find the same command in here, Polyline. Before we start tracing, we need to make sure that we have a planar mode enabled. So planar is located between ortho and osnap. This is just to make sure that when you start tracing things on the top floor, your curves and your polylines that you're going to be creating are not going to be flying all over the place on the z-axis, and everything going to be located on the same plane, and we don't need to fix it later. Okay, so Polyline tool, and what I'm going to do, I'm just going to zoom in close enough, and I'm going to start tracing over my floor plan. Because I already drawn some references, those vertical lines, I know exactly where this floor plan ends. Another thing to mention as well is that you can add as many reference lines as you want to make your life a bit easier, just to make sure that your floor plan is perfectly matches with your elevation. I can actually create a new layer and I can call it reference lines. I'm gonna move those two lines that I already drawn onto this layer. So I've selected those two curves. I'm going to right click on a layer called reference lines, and I'm going to change object to this layer. I'm also going to give it a different color, so for example bright green. And now I can see that my both reference lines are now green because they are now assigned to a reference lines layer. I'm going to draw a couple more reference lines. So for example, I know where the walls are starting on this elevation, and you can see if I continue those lines across, they're perfectly overlapping with the floor plan, so everything is nice and aligned. I can do the same thing with windows. Okay, now everything is more or less referenced. I can start tracing my floor plan. So I'm going to go back to my floor plan layer, make sure that it's current. And now with my ortho on, choosing the Polyline tool, I can start tracing things over. Ideally for this exercise, you need a couple of O-snaps turned on. We probably will need end, perpendicular, and probably intersection as well is quite useful. Make sure the rest are turned off for now. So we're going to be constantly working with the reference lines that we've just produced. Again, make sure that your ortho is on, or you keep holding shift on your keyboard, just to make sure that the lines that you produce are nice and straight. So when I'm gonna get closer to the reference lines that I produced, I'm gonna start seeing the O-snap message appearing for perpendicular and intersection. Just click once and just continue tracing your drawing over. When you come to an end of your tracing, you need to make sure that your final line is going to end exactly where the first one has started. The easiest way to make sure that everything is aligned, make sure that you have a smart track turned on. It's between O-snap and Gumbo on the bottom of your screen. So when you go over to the final curve, you can see that that's where it has started. I need to make sure that this point that I'm going to place right now is going to be perfectly vertically aligned to the bottom one. So what I can do before I start clicking anywhere, if I hover over my first point that I've placed and I just move it up, you can see it almost creates like a new reference line. It's almost like a little ruler. It just shows you that somewhere here it's going to be exactly a vertical position for my new point, and it's going to be exactly on a vertical line from the first point that I created. Those two lines are perfectly parallel to each other. Click again, and now finish your outline of your floor plan by joining your last point with your first one. And if you've done everything correctly, it will automatically finish your curve. You can start to see that you have a nice clear outline of your floor plan. Make sure that you have drawn everything with a single polyline. You don't have any lines going all over one direction, another direction, or lines that are just overlapping with each other. If everything is done correctly, if you select your outline and you go to your properties, you will have closed curve appearing as a description of your line type. So again, make sure that everything is now drawn with a single polyline. You don't have any lines that gone over each other. You have your final point ending exactly where the first one has started, and you don't have any weird gaps going on. When you select your object, it should say closed curve. So now we have our outline. We can see that in some places we have a wall thickness, and the easiest way to do that will be to use command offset. So for example, quite commonly when you have your outline of your drawing, you will need to have a second line that's going to be creating the inner part of your walls, and usually it's a consistent wall thickness. So offset will be a really useful command. If you use AutoCAD before, it's exactly the same command as well. So if I select the curve and type offset, I can specify the distance, how much do I want to offset this curve into. You can see that it's creating a copy of the curve that I've just drawn and just moves it on specific distance, either inside or outside. Right now distance specified is 200, you can see it's just not quite enough. So in brackets here I can just click on the word distance, I can change the measurement to 150, press enter, and now I can specify which side do I want to offset. So just move your cursor either outside or inside, click once, and you have your offset curve evenly offset everywhere by 150 millimeters. If you don't want to do something like that, if we don't have offset all the way around our image, we can have a different solution. We can have a different way of creating extra walls. So for example, we can see that there are walls going around all the way here. Instead of tracing it over with a polyline or creating offset, there is a different way to do this. We can start by creating multiple rectangles. So we're going to go into rectangle tool, or we can just type rectangle, and we're going to start on our corner just here. And we're going to start drawing a couple of rectangles that are perfectly overlapping each other. Because I know where this rectangle needs to end, I know that it needs to go up to this reference point. What you can do, you can click 3 point on the command line, and you can specify the width and the length of your rectangle. So I can go up to the reference point. If you're not getting snapped to anything, you can click on near, or you have perpendicular and intersection as well. If you hover over, you get close enough, you can see that the message appears. And now it's asking you to specify the height or the length of your rectangle. We know that those walls are 150 millimeters thick, so I can just type 150, and you can see that it's asking me what direction do I want my rectangle to draw. So I'm going to click inside, and I have a rectangle appearing just in here. I'm going to do the same thing with this vertical side, with this vertical wall. I'm going to choose rectangle, start in the bottom left corner. I'm going to choose 3 point. I'm going to zoom out with my mouse, go all the way up to the corner of my space, click again, and specify a width of 150. Press enter again, or choose what direction do you want this rectangle to go. So I'm going to go to the right, click again, and now you have two rectangles that are perfectly overlaps each other. And I'm going to continue doing this to all the walls around here. So again, rectangle, start from a corner, choose 3 point, show where do you want this rectangle to go up to. So I'm going to go up to here, and now it's going to be 150, so I'm just typing 150, press enter, specify do you want to go outside or inside, and just click once again. I have a couple of interior walls going on here, so I'm just going to start drawing them as well. I'm going to choose rectangle, start from this corner, 3 point. I'm going to go all the way down here, because I can always cut out this door, it's fine. So up to this point, and I'm going to specify the distance. This wall is interior wall, so it looks less wide to me. So I'm going to try to type 100 instead of 150. This looks pretty accurate to me, so click again, you have yourself a new rectangle. I'm going to draw this wall next, so new rectangle, from the corner, 3 point. Again, if I want to this wall to be matching with this wall, I can just hover over this wall, and I just slowly move my cursor to the side till it becomes perpendicular. Click again and type 150 as it's exterior wall in here. Click again, I have myself a new wall. We have a couple of more interior walls. So make sure that now you have near on, so we can snap anywhere on this curve. 3 point, go to the other side, interior wall, so the width is going to be 100. If it's stuck and doesn't want to move anywhere inside, you can always try to type -100, or just get closer and move your cursor to the other side, and it should snap to the side that you need it to. It actually also looks like we have a window here, but it doesn't start from a floor, so we have a bit of a wall appearing on the other side. Instead of drawing as a rectangle, I can just draw a polyline. So from here, perpendicular to the other side, press enter. We have another interior wall, rectangle. With the nearest snap on, I can snap anywhere on this curve. Start from here, 3 point, perpendicular, and we're going 100 to the right. We have ourselves a little rectangle, and we're going to start drawing where our doors will go. If you know that your doors, for example, 80 centimeters or 90 centimeters, or if they're wide, if they're 90 centimeters, you can obviously measure them to be a specific distance. But right now, we're just going to place those lines across, just roughly where we can see them on the floor plans. The same things here, where the window is supposed to go. And we just start tracing everything else, all other walls that we will need to produce. When you need to trace funky shapes like this column, for example, I have drawn one rectangle. For example, if you've done it a bit too wide, you can click on it and make sure that your Gumbo is on. You can scale it by clicking on little red rectangle just on the side here. You can also rotate it to create a cross. So you can either click Transform Rotate, or you can select an object, click Alt, and you can also click on this arc on your Gumbo, and you can click 90. It will create a copy of an object and gonna rotate it by 90 degrees. I also notice that I have a couple of those columns going on here. So what I can do, I can click and hold Alt on my keyboard, click and hold one of the arrows, and I can create a copy by just clicking and holding Alt on my keyboard and using Gumbo. Now I know that I need to make a copy on the right here, so click and hold Alt on your keyboard, and also click, hold and drag your red arrow to create a copy. You can delete this one, for example, to make sure that everything is even. So you can click and hold Shift on your keyboard to select multiple objects at the same time. Click and hold Alt and create a copy of 2 objects at the same time. You can now click and hold Shift to make a copy of both of those 2 objects here. Click and hold Alt, make a copy, click and hold Alt, make a copy, and now we have a grid of the columns appearing. They're perfectly located on an even distance away from each other. I have also just missed this wall. I can make sure that all the walls are the same thickness, I can just copy one of the walls that I've already done. So I can click and hold Alt on the keyboard, drag one with the Gumbo tool, move it around, and by using a scale tool on Gumbo, which is this red rectangle, I can now start scaling my object, this wall, on one direction. Move it so it matches the drawing. Okay, now we have all our walls traced over, and we're ready to go to the next step. Before we start extruding anything up, we need to make sure that all of our curves are nice and closed and they don't have any weird overlaps like we have here. I'm actually gonna hide picture layer with our floor plan. It's going to be a little bit easier to see. And you can see, because we used rectangle tool, we have a couple of objects overlapping each other, which is not ideal when you're trying to extrude your objects up. So what we're going to do, we're going to use a really useful command, and the command is called curve Boolean. It's asking us to select the curves that are overlapping each other. So we have all our rectangles and we're going to select all of them at the same time. Just like that. We're going to press enter and we're going to click inside the region that we would like to keep. So we want to keep all of these areas. The only thing that we're not going to click inside of the doors and windows. We're going to cut them out. If you accidentally clicked on the wrong thing, you can always click again to deselect it. I'm going to zoom out and we're going to do the same thing on the other side. Press enter. And now what we have is nice clean curves that are perfectly joined to each other, creating us perfect curves for extrusion. While they're still selected, we're going to hide them, or while they're selected, we can move them to a different layer. It's up to you which one do you want to do. So I'm actually going to go back and quickly select them again, and I'm going to move them to the next layer just to make sure I don't lose them. So I'm going to call them walls, and I'm going to call them plan. And while they're selected, I'm going to right click on this layer. I'm going to click on Change Object Layer, make it invisible. And now everything else is left is the rectangles that we have drawn before. We can just delete them. They were our references. We don't need them anymore. We will have much cleaner lines in the end. And now if I bring my layer walls plan back on, you can see that we have nice clean curves appearing on our floor plan. I also forgot to do those columns, so I'm going to do the same thing now. I'm actually going to make walls plan layer current. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to type again curve Boolean. Again, I strongly suggest you write that command down, really useful. I'm going to select all my columns right now, press enter. I'm going to select everything that I need to preserve. Okay, press enter, and now we have clean outlines of our columns. They're also located on wall plans. And if I hide that layer, I can now delete my reference lines for my columns. And if I bring walls plan back together, it's all nice and clean. Everything is closed curves. Beautiful. Okay, next, we're gonna make sure we're saving our file, really important. So we're gonna file and we're gonna do save as. Okay, next thing, we're gonna actually start producing a simple 3D model. So by now I can hide my reference lines. They're going to get a little bit on the way in the next step. And what I want to do is I want to group a section into one group, elevation into another elevation, and the short elevation onto short elevation section. So it's just to make sure that when I'm going to be moving things around, I'm not going to accidentally lose any lines behind. So I'm going to select my section and I'm going to type group. And now when I'm trying to select it, it selects as a single object. The same thing for elevation. I'm going to type group, or I can just press enter and it's going to repeat the last command that I was doing. And the same thing for the final drawing. Group or enter to repeat the final command. I'm also going to create a new layer. I'm going to call it section. A new layer, I'm going to call it long elevation. And also a new layer, I'm going to call it short elevation. And I'm just going to move those drawings accordingly to the appropriate layers. So I'm going to select my group that's called section, right click on the layer section and do change object to this layer. You can now hide it. You can now click on the long elevation, right click on the layer called long elevation and change object. Now short elevation, right click on the appropriate layer, change object layer, and now everything located on the right layers. Next thing, I'm going to move to perspective view. You don't have to constantly restore the views, go to perspective and maximize that. You can just click on a word of appropriate views that you need. I need perspective. I have my floor plan. And now I will be aligning this floor plan together with elevation and section. Also a good thing to mention as well, that sometimes when you trace something over in a top view, especially if you don't have a planar mode on, what could happen is some of the points of your drawing that you produce can start going up and down. And this could be really frustrating, especially when you need to start extruding something up. But the extrusion will only work if all your curves are planar, which means that they're laying on the same plane and you don't have anything like this happening where the points are suddenly start moving on the z-axis vertically up. It's clearly visible on your 4 main viewports. So before I moved any points up, you can see that on our front view and our right view, our whole drawing is transformed into single line because we're looking from a side. But sometimes what happens is the points can go all jumbled up and just move on the z-axis. Instead of going and manually moving every single point down, make sure that's all planar, there is a really useful command. So what we need to do, we can do Ctrl-A to select everything, and we type command set points or set pt. So in our situation, we know that our points have been moved on a z direction, so it's been moved up and down. So what we need to fix is z direction. So we untick everything else except that, press OK, and you can see that giving us a little preview how our drawing will look like. So it's almost trying to flatten all the points into the same plane. And the only thing it's now asking us is to specify where do we want to flatten it to, which plane. I'm going to click on the bottom left corner because that's where most of my points are. And now the whole floor plan has been flattened into the same plane. So it's a good practice to check all of this anyway before you start extruding, because it might come up with the issue that you cannot extrude because you are not having a planar curve. So to know a set point command is really useful. Set points, select your objects, press enter, and just choose set points by z-axis. Okay, the next we're gonna start aligning our elevations and sections to our floor plan. So I'm gonna start bringing section, an elevation, and a short elevation on our viewport. I'm gonna maximize the perspective view. I'm gonna start with this elevation just here. I'm gonna click on it, and what I want to do, I'm gonna rotate it 90 degrees, so I want it to be standing up. So for this task, Gumbo is really useful. So on perspective view, you can see our Gumbo has 3 arcs that allows us to rotate our object. In this situation, we need a red one. We want to put it vertically, and we can click on a red arc once, and we can type 90, press enter, and now our elevation has been set up vertically. So if I bring back my 4 viewports, you can see that now I have an elevation that is standing up. So now I want to align this elevation with our floor plan. So we know that in this situation we have this furthest corner of our elevation, and we know that it's matching with our floor plan just here. So what I want to do is I want to type command move, press enter, and I want to align this top corner with the end, make sure that your end snap is on, with the end boundary of our floor plan, just here. And now you can see that your elevation is aligned with your floor plan. We can do the same thing with our section. So right now it's laying down, so we're going to click on the red arc on our Gumbo, type 90, press enter, now it's standing up. And now we need to find what to align this this section with. So for example, we know there is a wall here, and I know that this wall has to align with this wall on the floor plan. So I'm just gonna type move, press enter, click on the bottom corner of this wall just here, and I want to go zoom into my floor plan and align this part of section with my floor plan. And you can see now that the edges of the wall is now aligned as well with my floor plan. You can also do the same thing with the short elevation, or you can leave it for now and work with it later. I'm actually going to also hide a section for now as well. And I'm going to continue working with just a floor plan and a main long elevation. So with our blue line that creates an overall outline for our floor plan, I want to create a base for our Barcelona Pavilion. I can also see that if I go to 4 viewports, I can see that we have a little bit of a terrain going on. So I know that on this side of a model, terrain is actually a little bit lower in comparison to this side, whereas the landscape is a bit higher. So I want to extrude, so transform this curve into a solid object based on the biggest measurement on this side. So I'm going to maximize the perspective view, select the outline, and I want to create a solid object, which means that I need to go to solid drop down, which is here, and I want to extrude this planar curve. It's planar because we already use the set points command, and I want to extrude this curve straight down. You can either type a measurement, how much you want to extrude it down, or you can use your elevation as reference. So you can go to the bottom of the elevation and just click on the endpoint. And you can see that now our solid object is the same height as this elevation in here. If you're struggling to see it in this mode, you can always click on the arrow next to the word perspective, change it to shaded, and now you have yourself a little 3D model. If for any reason your models start to look like this, and this is the most common mistake that's happening in Rhino, if you start to see through the object, it means that you have any form of problems with your curve. So it could be that your curve is open curve and you need to close it, or it might be that it's still saying closed but you still have the same issues. It means that you have some kind of an issue with your curve. Most of the time, if the extrusion doesn't work, the problem is in original 2D form. So come back to it and try to fix the problem. So you can either do a set points again to make sure that everything is planar, or it could be that you have an opening somewhere. So for example, your curve actually has a tiny little opening somewhere, and if you go to properties, it says open curve instead of closed. It just means that you need to close it, either by drawing a new vector in between and joining everything together by putting command join. It says that two curves join into one closed curve. Or you can also use the command close curve, which is a really useful command. This will automatically add a little segment, a little vector between two closest points and transform your open curve into closed. So I can just type close curve, and you can see that segment has been added. If I go to properties, it now says closed curve. With extrusion, if you have a couple of curves that are duplicating or overlapping each other, like for example here, it looks like a single curve going on here, but if you actually select one on opposite ends, you can see that there are actually two curves that are located exactly in the same place, that without any notes can be joined together and will create problem with extrusion later on. So if you do have problems with extrusion, if the object, your solid object becomes see-through, you might want to come back to your original curve, explode it, which is just here, and check every single curve and see if there are any duplicates going on. And when you deleted all the duplicates, you can just select all curves that you want to join up. So if I know that my floor plan is located on the same layer, instead of going and manually selecting every single one with shift holding up, I can just go to the floor plan layer, right click, select objects, and everything on this layer will be selected at the same time. I have notification pops up that says 16 curves added to selection, I can just type command join, and now all those 16 curves have now been joined into one closed curve. And now if I go to solid, extrude this curve straight based on the reference, so on the bottom of this elevation, just click on the corner and you have yourself a little extrusion. Now using the same principle, I want to extrude walls up. So I'm going to start creating new layers for 3D objects that I'm creating. So I'm going to create a layer, I'm going to call it 3D model. I'm also going to create a layer, I'm going to call it walls. I'm going to create a layer, I'm going to call it base. I'm going to change the color of them as well, so it's a little bit more noticeable. So I'm going to select the base that I have here, I'm going to move it to my base layer. And I also want to create subsections and want to create groups. Groups within groups, sorry. Just to make it a little bit easier to navigate around my layers. So I want to move this base layer and this walls layer under 3D model section. So I'm just going to click, hold and drag this base layer under the word 3D model. And now I have a little group appearing. I'm going to do the same thing with walls. Click, hold and drag until it's overlapping with 3D model. And now I have a little subsection going on that I can minimize or maximize. I'm going to create a layer, I'm going to call it 2D drawing. And I'm going to move all my other layers, make sure that they're unlocked under 2D drawings. So now it's a little bit easier to navigate. I can minimize those groups or I can maximize it to make them all visible. So and now I'm going to be extruding walls. So I'm going to make my walls layer current. I'm going to go around my model, click and hold shift and select all objects that represent walls. And because we used curve boolean, they're all nice and closed curves, they're all planar, so really nice to work with. So now all of the walls are selected. I want to start extruding them, and I can see that all based on the elevation, all the walls are the same height. So I'm gonna create solid objects, so I'll go into solid drop down menu. I'm working with curves, so I'm gonna extruding curves straight up. And I want to extrude them based on the reference of my elevation. So I'm going to go to the top corner of those walls, click once, and now I have my my main walls appearing just here. Perfect. Okay, we also know that in Barcelona Pavilion we have two pools, one located just here and one located on the back. So I want to draw those pools on my floor plan first. So I'm going to go back to my 2D drawings. I'm going to go back to floor plan. Make sure that I make this layer current. I'm going to turn off my walls section. I'm going to turn my picture back on so I can see the drawings that I need to trace. And by using rectangle tool, I'm going to start creating a swimming pool. So one just here, and another one here. So because I've turned those walls layer off, I can now be snapping again to my 2D drawing instead of a top of the walls. Have two swimming pool going on. I also can draw this bench in here. And I can also trace over the overall boundary of those stairs. Just like that. Perfect. I can turn off picture off. Now I have boundaries of my pools. I can bring walls back on if I want to. Okay, I have 2 pools. I can select both of them at the same time. And now I need to create little boxes that I'm going to be subtracting from overall base. So I'm going to be cutting out those pools from the base to give them a lower base ground. So with both rectangles for outlines of a pool selected, I'm going to go solid and I'm going to extrude those 2 curves down. And it's important now to have a look at the front view and on the right view as well, just to make sure that my pool that I'm creating is not going to be lower than base of my model. So we can see that the base of model happening somewhere here. You can change, for example, front view on X-ray if you want, just to make sure. Click somewhere where you want your swimming pool to end, because we don't have an exact measurement for it, so I'm just going to be guessing right now. As long as it doesn't go further than the base of my model, as long as the swimming pool has bottom to it. And I click 1, and I have 2 rectangles that are now overlapping with my base model. Rhino really doesn't like when 2 objects are located in the same plane. You can see that the rectangles with a swimming pool is now in exactly the same plane as my base, and you can see this little flickering going on. So sometimes what you want to do, because we're going to be subtracting one object from another, you want your objects to be overlapping on all sides and not be laying on the same plane. So you can either move it slightly upwards, so you have your object selected, and you can just click once on the front or right view on your blue arrow pointing up, and you can type the measurement. So you can move it by, for example, 10 millimeters up, and you can see that now rectangles that represent in your pools are perfectly overlapping with your base. Or another option as well, to make sure that your subtract tool will work fine. When you creating your 2 rectangles that you're going to be using to cut out your pools with, so when you go to solid and you're going to extrude those curves down, in the brackets and here you have option for both sides. Click yes, and you can see that now you create an extrusion both directions. And because we're only going to be using those boxes to cut 2 objects out, a swimming pool out of a base, it doesn't really matter if they go in both directions or no. We're not going to be keeping those rectangles. So what we're going to be doing are commands that are called Boolean. I'll quickly show you on a quick example, and a bit more simple example, what the Boolean commands are for. So for example, I have a little box here. I also have, for example, a sphere. I also have a cone appearing here. So just a couple of simple geometric shapes. So Boolean commands includes in itself union, subtract, and intersection tools. They're located under solid drop down. On the bottom here you have union, you have difference, which is a subtract tool, and you have intersection. So for example, union, it just means that if right now you have multiple objects created that are overlapping each other, if you go to solid union, you can select your object that you want to union, press enter, and then now a single object. I'm going to do Ctrl Z to undo it. So again, before you union it, there are 3 separate objects, but if I go solid and union, I select objects that I want to join together, the objects that I want to union together, I press enter, and now they're a single object. And be careful with the union. Do it only when you're 100% sure that you want those 2 objects to become one, because you won't be able to undo this. You also have an option to do subtract, or in Rhino it's called difference. So in here it's important is to find out what the object you want to cut out from and the objects you want to cut out with. So for example, if I want to cut out a form out of this cube, and this form is a sphere, I need to keep reading what it says in the command line. So I need to select an object to subtract from. So it's going to be a cube. I want to cut out from the cube. I'm going to press in enter. And now it's asking me to choose an object that I want to subtract with, which is going to be the sphere. I'm pressing enter. And you can see that one shape been cut out from another. Sometimes sphere and cube doesn't really want to subtract from each other. Let's try from this shape. So solid, difference, cut out the shape from a cube, enter, and I want to cut out this cone, press enter, and now I have a perfect shape cut out. Let's try again with a sphere. So I have sphere perfectly overlapping with a cube. Oh, let's not do sphere, let's do a different form. Let's do, for example, this pyramid. Okay, like that. I have two objects overlapping each other. I'm going to go solid. And for example, this time I want to cut out this cube out of the pyramid. So I'm going to go solid, difference. I want to cut out from the pyramid, press enter, and I want to cut out this part of a cube. Press enter, and you have your object cut out. You also have something that's called intersection. So what it's going to do is also similar to difference, but this time it's going to only leave the objects that are sharing the edges between the cube and the cone itself. So everything that's in between. So it's easier if I show you an example. So intersection, it's asking you to select the first object, press enter, second object, enter, and whatever has been in between is now left behind. The good thing about the Boolean command, if you're not sure which of the Boolean commands you need to use, you can go to solid, and there is an option for Boolean two objects. And you can select two objects at the same time, and by flickering in between, it's going to show you all the different options that you can have with the Boolean commands. And when you're happy with the final outcome, just click enter to accept, and so that's what you're left with. So we have our base, and we have two rectangles that we need to subtract with. So we're going to be using a Boolean difference command. So we're going to go solid, difference, and we want to cut out those rectangles out of the base. So select an object to subtract from, which will be the base. Select the base, press enter, select your swimming pools, press enter, and now you have two shapes cut out. They're perfect swimming pools. If you change to, for example, rendered mode, you start to have a 3D model appearing. Perfect. Again, don't forget to save. So file, save, just to make sure you don't lose any data. So next thing, we're going to quickly model those stairs. I actually want to have a look how many steps we have. So I'm going to turn the picture on. I'm going to count how many stairs. So we have 9 stairs going on here. We have the main outline of our stairs. And I want to divide this outline, this boundary, by 9 steps. The easiest way to do this will be to draw a polyline. Make sure that your midpoint is on, from a middle here to the other side to the midpoint. Press enter, and I'm gonna divide this line onto the 9 sections. So the command that I'm going to be using is divide, press enter, and specify number of segments will be 9. Press enter, and now you have points located exactly where they need to be to allow 9 even segments going on. Okay, I'm gonna select those objects that I have. So rectangle, line across, divided by 9 segments with 9 points. I want to deselect the base that I've just accidentally selected. So I'm just gonna click and hold Control on my keyboard. Click on the base to deselect it. Click on the outline of my floor plan. And I just need to start working with my stairs. I'm actually going to select the base and keep it there as well, just in case. And everything else I want to hide. The easiest way to do this will be a type command isolate, which means that it will hide everything else except the object that you currently have selected. So isolate, press enter, perfect. So what I want to do, I want to give this rectangle a full height of those stairs just to make sure that it touches the floor. So I love the base specifically to use as a reference for my height. So I'm going to use the outline of my rectangle. I'm going to go solid, extrude this curve straight. It's still going both directions, so make sure that you untick both sides. And now I'm using the bottom of the base as the overall height for my stairs. Now I can hide my base, I don't need it anymore, right now it's just getting on the way. So I select the base and I type hide, press enter, perfect. I'm going to change the color of the base so it's a little bit easier to see. So I'm going to go to properties, and while base is selected, I can change display color. Instead of color being assigned by layer, I can change it to something else. So for example, dark gray. Perfect, a little bit more visible. I can change it to wireframe, also good. Okay, so what you want to do is you want to start drawing lines across that will represent each individual step. So I'm going to go to top view. I'm going to start drawing vertical lines across. So I'm going to use a line or polyline tool. You don't have to use just a normal polyline. If you click and hold, you can see the different options. How can you draw your polyline? I'm specifically interested at the third one, line from the midpoint. In this way, I can choose a middle of a line, which I know is going to be this point in here. Make sure that now you need to be able to snap to the point. So make sure that when you go to all snaps, you choose point. And now you can snap to this point, click once, make sure that your snaps are on, your ortho is on, and you can start drawing a line that goes from the top to bottom from the middle point. Click enter again. You don't need to retype the same command again. Make sure that your curves are nice and vertical, parallel to each other, otherwise we're going to have wonky stairs. And we continue drawing our steps from the midpoint. Perfect. Okay, change the perspective mode. Okay, so now what we want to do, we want to select, click and hold shift, select all those curves that we've just drawn, and we want to extrude them down so they're cutting through this box that represents our stairs. So we can go solid and we can extrude this curve straight, and you can see that it's now creating surfaces that's going to be cutting through our object. If you don't want to go solid and extrude the curve, if you look closely into your Gumbo tool, where you have your little arrow, you also have a little circle in the middle of each individual arrow. If you click specifically on the circle, click, hold and drag, it will do the same extrusion. So it's up to you, how do you want to do it. You can either go solid and extrude curve, or you can use your Gumbo. Okay, if I now change it to shaded mode, you can see that I have perfect vertical surfaces that are slicing through my object. So the command that I want to be using will be Boolean split. I'm gonna select an object that I want to split, which is gonna be my cube. Press enter. I'm gonna select cutting surfaces, which will be all those surfaces here. Press enter. And now you can select every individual object that you just split. So it's the same as when we were splitting the original paper with original surface with our technical drawings drawn on it, but for this situation, this is for 3D object. This is a Boolean split. Now you can delete those cutting surfaces, you don't need them anymore. Okay, so we have our vertical cuts down, and now what we want to do the same things but horizontally and create steps in between. So I'm going to use Polyline. I'm going to start from the middle point here, going vertically down into the middle point down here. I know that I have 9 steps, so I want to divide this vertical curve into 9 segments again. So 9, press enter, and I have myself 9 points. If you accidentally moved something like what I just did, just do Ctrl Z to undo. Go to Polyline, click and hold, so you can have an option for line from midpoint. And now draw your curves from the midpoint to the edges. Make sure that your perpendicular snap is on. Make sure that's all nice and straight. If you're not sure that if it's going straight or not, go to the right view and just do the same thing on the right view. Just to be on the safe side, so all your curves are nice and straight. Now when you've drawn your curves, click and hold Shift, select all of them. And the same thing as before, you can either go solid and extrude those curves, or you can use your Gumbo tool. You can use it on the top view, it will be easier. You can see that there is a little circle on the arrow. Click, hold and drag, and it will create you surfaces to cut with. We're going to do Boolean split. Select an object to cut with. Sorry, to cut from. So we're going to select all those individual objects that we've just created. Press enter. Select all the cutting surfaces at the same time. Press enter. And now we have individual steps. You can now delete all the original cutting surfaces. You don't need them anymore. You can also go edit, select objects, points. So you don't need them anymore as well. You can just click delete. You can also go edit, select objects, curves, as everything else, because everything else is hidden. You're not going to delete any important curves that you're going to be needing to use, so you can just delete those. And what you need to have is cube that divided into small steps, and we're going to be slowly starting going around and deleting all the steps that you don't need. Make sure that you don't accidentally delete what you're actually going to be using. And you have yourself little stairs going on. Obviously right now they're individual objects, but you can select everything together, solid, union, give it a second, and now you have a single object that represents your stairs. You can now type word show, and everything else appears. You have your little stairs, change to rendered, and now you have a nice detail going on. It's obviously not the only way to draw stairs. You can draw, if you know the specific measurement, you can start typing those measurements for stairs. So you have your full outline of stairs. Make sure that's a closed object. And when you go to perspective, you can just simply go solid, extrude, straight, and you have yourself the same stairs. So again, it's up to you, how do you want to draw those stairs. This is the way that I've shown you. Good to know, plus we'll learn a couple more commands. So I'm going to type command show to bring everything back in, and we have ourselves a model. We're going to quickly select columns, outlines of the columns, and extrude them up as well. So click and hold shift, same as before, we go solid, extrude curves straight up. We know they need to be the same height as the walls, so just reference it based on the height of the walls next to them. You have yourself little columns. Now we need to add some roofs to this. So I'm gonna go back to top view, I'm gonna go back and turn my picture layer on, and everything that's dotted lines, it's our roofs. So we're gonna choose rectangle, and we're gonna trace it over, same as before. Because I want it to be even distance all the way around, I can just select the curve that I've just drawn, I can type offset, and I can just specify the distance, how much I want to offset it by. So 100, 100, so even spacings all the way around. The same things with this roof. So we have a roof going on here. I want to offset it this time inwards by 100. Okay, we have our two roofs. I'm going to hide the picture again, go to perspective. I'm going to select both of those roofs that I've just drawn. You can see that they're now located on your level of your base plane, and obviously they need to be higher, they need to be laying on top of those walls. So the first thing first, I need to be moving them to that height. You can either go to the Gumbo tool, click on the blue arrows that represent an x-axis, and just type how much do you want to move it by. So for example, 2000 meters will move it up to this level, or if you know the exact measurement, just type it. You can also move it based on a reference, or you can use the same command as set points, the ones that we used in the beginning of this exercise when we were flattening the drawing. So we selected our objects, we put set points, and I want to move it based on the z-axis. Press OK, and I'm going to use the top of the wall as a reference. And now those roofs are laying perfectly on top of the wall. We can also see that this roof has two layers. So one layer underneath is this line that we've drawn inside, so it's a little bit shorter, and the one outside. So I want to select both rows at the same time that are inside, and I want to go solid, extrude those curves straight, and my reference is going to be the end, the top point of this roof on the elevation. And now I need to extrude this outer roof as well. But right now it's located on the bottom of a first roof. I need to move it higher, so I'm going to select both of them at the same time. I'm going to use set points again. I'm going to move those two curves on the z-axis perfectly vertical up, press OK, and I want to use the top of the roof as a reference. And now the same as before, based on the reference of our elevation, solid, extrude planar curve straight up until it reaches the top of the elevation. We have two roofs. If I change it to rendered mode, we start to have something similar to Barcelona Pavilion going on. Okay, the final thing that we're going to do is probably going to be those windows in here. So we know that along this wall, if you go look at the picture, we have a series of windows appearing just here. We can see them also on our elevations. So what we want to do, we're gonna change this to shaded. We're gonna select both of our roofs. We're gonna move it into a separate layer, which we're gonna call roofs. Right click on the layer, change object layer, move it to 3D model subgroup so we can easily turn it on and off. I'm gonna go onto top view, and I'm gonna trace where those windows supposed to be going. So I have little frames for those pictures, so for those windows. So I'm just gonna trace them over. I'm gonna make a copy because I know that it needs to go to the other side as well. So click and hold Alt, Perfect. And in perspective view, I have 2 frames for my windows. I'm actually going to move them to the middle of this wall, so I'm just going to type move. Make sure that your mid snap is on. You probably want to hide this picture view so you can actually see what you're doing. If you can't zoom into something, while it's selected, type ZSA. It will allow you to zoom in much closer. You can turn off Smart Track just in case it's getting on the way. And now I want to find the midpoint of the selected rectangle, click on it, and I want to move it to the middle of this wall. And now both of those frames are located exactly in the middle of this wall. I now want to give them thickness, so I'm going to do extrude curve straight down, and I'm going to use the bottom of this wall as a reference. Perfect. I have 2 walls going on here, and now I need to give the height, the top and the bottom part of my frame. Again, if you can't zoom into an object, if it's too far, or if it's too small, select it, tap ZSA, and you will be able to move it. I now want to make sure that the frame is even all the way around, so I'm taking this rectangle and I'm gonna rotate it. So select it and click on one of the arcs of your Gumbo, rotate it by 90, and now it's a vertical. I'm gonna move it based on this corner to this edge here. I'm also gonna copy it to the bottom of my frame. So I just selected type copy, and I want to move it copy it from this bottom corner up to the bottom of a frame here. Click and hold Shift, select them at the same time, and now go solid, extrude curve, straight, and now you can extrude them up to the end of the frame. Start to have one big frame appearing for your windows. And now we need to divide them into three even windows. So ideally what you want to do is you want to try a line tool or polyline. You can go to, for example, front view to make it a bit easier. Find the edge of your frame, find the midpoint here, and the midpoint on the other side. If you don't like working on the front view, it's fine, we can go back to perspective. And you can see it's accidentally snapped to the wrong thing. So I want to make sure that I'm snapping to the 3D model. Hover over where you think the midpoint should be and you will be able to snap to it. Go to the other side and find a midpoint here as well. Press enter. I'm going to change the color of this line so it's a little bit more visible. And now we want to divide it into 3 even parts. So we're going to type divide 3, enter. We have 2 points appearing which divided our curve into 3 even segments. What we want to do, we want to copy those vertical lines and place it exactly in the middle where those points are located. So we need to find a midpoint of this object. So easiest way to do this, you can draw a line from middle point to middle point here. And now when you select your object and type copy, you'll be able to find midpoint of this object. And we just make sure that we are snapping to points, and then click once, click again, and we have our window frame appearing. You can select all of those objects together and you can union them into one frame. So solid union, and you have yourself a single frame appearing just here. Perfect. Now we need to add glazing into this, and maybe some inner framing for our windows. So if I go to the front view, so I can perfectly see what is happening, I'm gonna hide those columns because they're getting on the way. So I'm just select them and type hide. Go to the front. I'm gonna also select, have a look where is my front elevation, long elevation appearing, and just hide it from a layer so it doesn't get on the way. I have 3 identical windows appearing. And what I need to do, I need to create inner framing and a glazing inside. The easiest way to do this, we will need to extract this curve. You can either do it by going to rectangle and go from one corner, you can do 3 points, to the other corner, downwards, and so on and so on. Or what you can do is you can go curve and you can extract the curve from object, so we can duplicate edges. So curve from object, duplicate edge, and we're just gonna go around, selecting the edges, press enter, and while they're still selected, I'm gonna type join. I'm gonna give it a different color so it's easier to see. Perfect. I can go to front view and I can offset this curve inwards to give it an inner frame. So for example, I can do 35. I want to do it inside. I want to select both of them at the same time. Perspective view, and have those 2 curves that represents an inner frame. I can move it to the middle, so I can type move, and I can move it from this corner to the middle of the frame in here. And now when I go to solid and I extrude this curve straight, I can again choose both sides. So it's going to be extruding both sides evenly. Let me change to rendered mode so it's a little bit easier to see. So it's evenly extrudes to the both sides. Click once and you have yourself a little inner frame going on. So again, I'm going to repeat the same process on the next window. So I'm going to extract the curve from a 3D object. So I'm going to go edit. So I'm going to go curve, curve from object, duplicate edge, and just select each individual edge here. Press enter and type join. I can offset this curve inside by 35, the same as before. It now remembers my settings. I select both curves. I'm going to type move, and from this corner to the middle of the frame, solid, extrude the curve straight to both sides. I can reference it based on the frames that I already done, and I have a second frame appearing just in here. Because I know that the third window is exactly the same width as the other one, I can just copy the same frame. So I can select it, type copy, press enter, and I can find the points that both of those windows are sharing. So it's going to be, for example, this corner. I know it's going to be the same distance, so I can copy from this corner, zoom out, zoom back in where the next window frame needs to go. I can place it in the same corner, and now those both inner frames are going to be located on the same line. I can now do the glazing with the same tool, so I can choose the inner curvature that fits inside of a frame. I can go solid, extrude curve, straight, both sides, and for example this time I can actually type the measurement. So for example 4 millimeters, press enter. Now we're going to have a glazing, the same thing here, have the inner curve, press enter because I want to extrude again onto both sides, type 4, you have yourself glazing appearing. And the final one I can just copy. So select your glazing, type copy from the corner, bottom left corner of your inner frame, zoom into the new window and just place it here. I'm gonna bring roofs back into my model. I can go edit, select objects, can select all the curves, and for example I can hide them, or you can hide them based on the layers. And you start to have your Barcelona Pavilion appearing by just using a simple Nurbs modeling, simple extrusions and Boolean union and differences, and you can start to get yourself a 3D model appearing. The rest of the walls and windows can be made using exactly the same processes, exactly the same tools. By the end of this exercise, you should have something similar to what I have in here. So I have Barcelona Pavilion. I have all my layers cleaned out. Everything is correctly color coded. Everything is nice and clean. So for example, I have subgroups called base. Inside of it, it has the actual base, it has the stairs, it has front pool, it has back pool, it has a water plane if you want to add a water texture to it later on. We also have roofs. On this model I also downloaded a 3D furniture which you can find online. You have exterior bench. You have your columns. So again, it's really important that you start working with your layers and you start moving things to appropriate layers straight away. It will save you so much time afterwards. So for example, if you want to set up an exploded axonometric, you can just go to set view, isometric, choose yourself an isometric view, and for example you want to move those roofs up, so it's exploded axo. You go to your layer roofs, and because everything is correctly laid out into different layers, you can just select objects that represent roofs and just move them on a vertical axis, on the z-axis. You can do the same thing with the base, so right click on the base, select object, just move it downwards, and you start to have yourself a little exploded axonometric drawing appears that you can just extract. So again, start working with your layers. It's really important that you understand how to color code, how to freeze the layers, and so on and so on. Okay, so that's it for today. So this is a basic tools and basic interface of Rhino. I strongly suggest you practice and you finish your model, and we will continue with our ADD workshops next week. I hope you found this session useful. Everything is recorded and going into our YouTube page. Thank you very much, and we'll see you in the next couple of weeks.